Hello and welcome back to the Final Lap podcast. This is Josh. I'm joined as always by Sam, and we have a lot to get to, a lot to break down from the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. First though, Sam, how are you doing? How did you enjoy the race this weekend?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, a little lighter weekend for us, but I enjoyed watching this one, and I'm excited to get to it.
Yeah, Oscar Piastri wins in Saudi Arabia for his third victory of the season, vaulting him to the top of the championship standings, where he now kind of has control of things up there. What did you think of his race? Getting out front after the pit cycle and just holding on for the lead from there.
Yeah, it was another great weekend from Oscar. I mean, I know that they have the fastest car at the moment, but he got out there and executed, did what he had to do, put the car on pole, and then sort of controlled the race. I know that he had that lap one incident with Max, and things were a little questionable there. Both sides have their opinions on the matter, but he did everything that he needed to do, getting himself into effectively the lead on the first lap, even when he didn't technically have it yet with the 5-second penalty, and then kind of cruising from there, managing his tires well when he was behind Max, and then advancing past him after he served the penalty and kind of cruising to a win here. So, yeah, another really solid race from Oscar, and it really puts him in the driver's seat here for the Drivers' Championship potentially.
Yeah, I was going to say it was a great weekend for him, obviously winning the race, but in terms of the championship as well, I thought it was a great drive. I think he was, he kind of fell back a little bit from Max early on, even though Max had that 5-second penalty and he was still effectively in the lead. I think that was mostly up to tire saving at that point for him, and just kind of managing that gap, keeping it within the 5 seconds so that they could respond if there was any pits or, if they called Max to the pits or whatever. I think he did a great job just kind of controlling the race. He knew that his biggest championship rival was, starting back in 10th, and it was going to be hard for him to make, huge advancements in the race. So, yeah, I think he did a great job, especially on that start, too, just getting alongside and, slightly ahead of Max right there at the apex, and just kind of forcing Max to make that decision there. So I thought that the start was great. I thought he controlled the pace well from there. It was definitely a great weekend for Oscar. It's still very early in the championship, but Oscar is kind of in a place now where he can control things from here with the lead as leader in the championship and also as the lead McLaren now. So it sets up very well for him going forward. And he's just, in a really good place now. 3 wins, the most of anyone this year. He's definitely in the driver's seat, I would say.
Yeah, and I think we're in an interesting spot here where Oscar certainly is the hot hand at the moment and has the advantage for now, but one really good weekend from Lando, I think, could put him right back in there as well. He's only 10 points down in the standings, and obviously we still have a ton of racing to go, so I think there's still going to be a back-and-forth battle at McLaren. We've still got a lot more season to go, and, of course, Miami, the site of Lando's first win last year, and I think, we're not doing predictions yet for that race, but there's a good chance he can sort of right the ship there, and we can have a battle. But absolutely at the moment, Oscar is certainly in control and has the upper hand, and we'll see. Maybe Oscar can shut the door in Miami, not shut the door on the whole season per se, but really, take another step in establishing himself as the lead McLaren and the guy that they're going to prioritize for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Lando needs to kind of, gain some points back here. He can't keep bleeding out points because, at some point that gap would just become too big for Oscar for Lando to Oscar to overcome, just with teammate head-to-head team orders and all of that. It would just become very difficult for Lando, mostly because they're on the same team. But yeah, it's still very early. Like I said, like you said, he's only down 10 points in the championship. So, that's a first place and a third place, and those kind of positions are equaled out, and they're back on level ground. Like you said, we're going to Miami where Lando won. And he had a great race last year in Miami, but also, before that yellow flag, I mean, Oscar was ahead of Lando at that point in that race as well. So it's a good place for Oscar too. I think these McLarens will be pretty good anywhere. I think we've kind of seen that just through the variety of tracks we've gone to so far, and they're always, the one out front or, just right there fighting for the win. So, with the McLaren dominance that we've seen so far, from a car standpoint, I think it's, Oscar's just in a very good spot with this win, and going to some more tracks where I think McLaren can do some damage as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely still these two guys far and away for the championship. I mean, points wise, Max and even George Russell aren't that far behind, but just like you mentioned, the week to week pace of these McLarens is, in my opinion, miles better than pretty much any other car. You see, Red Bull has great pace on some tracks, but on other tracks, they're well behind, and they're kind of a weekend to weekend car. And then you look at Mercedes and Ferrari, and I think Mercedes is a little closer than Ferrari at the moment, but both have a pretty good amount of ground still to make up to the McLaren, at least on race pace. So, yeah, these two guys are still certainly the not just the current leaders in the Drivers' Championship, but far and away, I think will be the odds favorites and kind of what we expect to see still. This head-to-head teammate battle will play out through the rest of the year.
Yeah, I don't think we can count Max out yet. Like you said, only 11 points behind, I think, in the championship. And on top of that, he was, if he stays on pole there and leads through turn one, I think he has a great chance to win this race because he had very good race pace, very comparable race pace to the McLarens for the whole Grand Prix. Like I said, he got a little bit of a gap on Oscar there at the beginning on his first stint. And then he maintained the gap really after he came out behind Oscar from there the rest of the race. So in dirty air as well for that whole second stint, that longer second stint. So, after last week where we saw the Red Bull just not perform very well at all in Bahrain, it was a little concerning, but here they performed very well, and if the car is good enough like this, I don't think we can count Max out at all. He's gonna get the max out of every weekend. Maybe this weekend he could have got a little bit more if he got off to a better start, but for the most part, I don't think anyone else on the grid is probably putting that Red Bull on pole in the first place or finishing second. So you could say he could have done a little bit better, but I think he really also just kind of maximized what that car should and can do.
Yeah, and I know Max has said that he does not expect them to compete for a driver's title, but I think it's a little bit too early to fully count him out. Like you said, I think at the end of the day, that might just be him trying to kind of undersell their expectations and kind of cool the fans' expectations a little bit. But I think, they're maybe a little too inconsistent to keep up with the McLarens week to week on the pace of the car, but Max is, still, in my opinion, the best driver in the field, and I think that he'll be good enough to kind of hang around all year. I don't know that he'll be able to pull it off unless they get some pretty solid upgrades, but yeah, I think he'll hang around all year and probably end up finishing in this third spot that he's currently in right now.
Yeah, I think that's probably what we would expect at this point. But if they get some upgrades and some things go their way, it's definitely not out of the question for Max to win this championship, and that would be his best win of any championship by far, I think. Coming off last season where that arguably could have been his best as well. But speaking of Max, and I think one of the big talking points from the Grand Prix was that early incident, that early interaction between Oscar Piastri and Max Verstappen going into turn one. Max got a 5-second penalty there for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. It seemed like Oscar just kind of was, got off to the better start and took the inside from Max. It's a really tricky one to figure out if he deserved that penalty or not because, he did, they were pretty side by side in my opinion. I think Oscar was a little bit ahead, but Max isn't going to back out of that move. We know how Max races, so that was either going to end at that point in a crash or Max taking the, just going straight through the corner. Um, to me, it's always hard to judge whether these penalties are, the correct call when they're pretty side by side. I mean, you could argue, inches ahead for Oscar in that situation, but for the most part, they're side by side. And for those ones, I never really have strong opinions one way or the other on the call because technically, by the rules, Oscar was slightly ahead, but I mean, that's just inches. They're really, for all intents and purposes, they're side by side there. So yeah, I'm not gonna say that he didn't deserve that penalty. I think he did. Probably in the end, I think it was the right call by the stewards. But yeah, it's just a tough one because it was such a close battle, and it wasn't like Max was like halfway, but like half like his nose was at like half of Oscar's car. It was pretty much right side by side.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, a penalty was the right call, even though, like you said, it was very close, and I don't think it would have been a grave injustice if one wasn't called. But I sort of agree with the commentary team on this one. They talked about maybe a position swap instead of a 5-second penalty, maybe being a more just penalty, and I think I agree with that. If that Red Bull had the pace that it had a couple years ago, and that happened, then Max could have potentially driven off there and sort of offset the 5-second penalty. And obviously they didn't in this scenario because the car just doesn't have the pace to do that at the moment. But I think that the position change would have been a little more fair, would have lined them up kind of back where they were meant to be, especially if they could have done it coming out of that safety car, just Oscar in first, Max in second, and then let them race from there. I think that kind of makes more sense as a penalty in that scenario than a 5-second penalty or anything else. But yeah, I agree that it's at the end of the day, it was Oscar's position, and I think that they were right to make that call. But like you said, it was a close one, and it certainly would not have been, if it was a no call, it definitely would not have been their worst one. So yeah, that's kind of where I lean on it.
Yeah, and Oscar was very close to going off the track there in turn one. I get what Max was saying Oscar didn't have any intent to make that corner completely. I get where he's coming from on the outside. It probably looked that way. But Oscar did manage to keep it within the track limits, and that's kind of all you can ask from Oscar in that situation. If he would have fully drove off track, then Max would have had a much better case to make there. But yeah, I like what you're saying about just ordering a position swap instead of a 5-second penalty. There's some situations where that might not work out if Oscar had somehow fallen behind George Russell or whoever that was following right behind.
Yeah.
That might have been a little bit more difficult because you're then asking Max to give up a position to George that he didn't lose. But in this exact situation, I think that could have worked out, a little bit better, and we could have had a kind of a more full-on race from there with Max just behind Oscar trying to find some way around. It might have made the pit strategy more interesting with Max maybe trying to go for an undercut or something. So I think that probably would have helped the race play out a little better in the end, and might have given us a little bit more excitement.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if there was damage to one of their cars, if it had been like a full-on wreck, then yeah, obviously you have to start looking at time penalties then. But in an incident like that where there's no damage and he's kind of just cuts the corner there, even if that wasn't his intention, then yeah, I think that's the right call, is just a position swap and let him race cleanly, hopefully, from there on. And yeah, I just think that works a little bit better than the time penalty in that scenario. I think the time penalty should be, obviously, you have your other penalties as well, pit lane infractions and stuff like that you apply it for. But for incidents like that as well, when there's damage or when a car gets knocked out of the race, then yeah, I think that's kind of more where your time penalty should be applied. And in an incident like this, I think it would just be better to swap positions.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be interesting to see the stewards maybe steer that direction going forwards. It's interesting to look at because Max did finish just 2.8 seconds behind Oscar in the end. And, if you subtract that 5-second penalty, that would put Max back out front for the race win. So do you think without that penalty, Max would have been able to win the race, or do you think Oscar still would have managed a way around and, got that win?
I certainly think he could have. I think it's tough to make that call 100% with the change in circumstances that we had. Just the way the different cars drive in dirty air compared to one another. I know that was something that Oscar talked about a lot during the race when he was behind Lando there for a little bit and then passing some lapped cars as well. He was struggling with dirty air. So I think it's a little bit tough to tell for sure, just based on how the cars would have reacted in a scenario. I know that the teams have sims. They probably know that, or have a lot better idea than we do with the race simulations, kind of how that would have played out. But I think it's certainly well within the realm of possibility that Max could have won that race. I mean, he really surprised me all day with the pace of that Red Bull. Just, obviously he's quicker than Tsunoda, but even before Tsunoda's wreck, like just in qualifying and everything, I feel like we hadn't seen that level of pace where they could keep up with the McLarens for a whole race. And so to come out and do that, not just on the one qualifying lap, which was fantastic from Max, but then to come out and keep up with Oscar for the whole race, even if he ends up falling behind him, he keeps up with Oscar effectively, and he finishes 2 spots ahead of Lando. I think that's really impressive, and I think that they certainly could have won this race if it played out a little differently.
Yeah, I would say he could have, but I doubt that he would have, just because the alternate, reality here is Max backs out of that into turn 1. He falls behind Oscar, slots in right behind, or maybe even from that position being so far out, you're taking the rest of that corner very awkwardly. He could have even got passed by Russell there, or someone else going into turn 1, putting him behind 1 or 2 cars, letting Oscar have the clean air out front. I just don't see Max being able to overcome that with Oscar out front and clean air with that McLaren. It's certainly possible because, like we said, with Oscar having clean air for the end of that race, Max was still able to kind of keep hold with what the margin was. So it's definitely possible because he had some pace in that car and he had some speed, but I just find it very difficult. I find that it would have been very difficult for Max to overcome a McLaren and clean air for an entire 50-lap race. I think that would have been a tough ask. Like I said, possible, but I just think with the alternate version of that playing out, where Max is in second after turn 1, or maybe even third, depending on how the rest of that corner goes, I just think it would have been a tough ask for Max from there.
Well, I do agree with you. If Oscar had gotten off cleanly in turn 1 and there was no incident there, I do think, if it had played out the same as it did and they just didn't assess a penalty for Max, I think that's the scenario where Max has a better chance to win the race, where he's the one out in clean air and they just kind of let the cars go from there. Then I think he would have had a better chance. But yeah, if Oscar had just gotten off cleanly and Max had backed out a little bit there, even if he maintained second, I think you're right that Oscar would have, and maybe not like a 20, 30-second domination, but I think he would have won the race pretty cleanly, yeah.
Yeah, I think it would have been like probably a 5, 6, 7-second margin of victory there. There were other options too Max could have taken, like I said, like when we were talking about swapping positions as the outcome instead of the penalty. Max could have undercut Oscar and tried some strategy play or something. So there are other options, but I just think it would have been pretty difficult for Max to overcome that. Going to Lando now, he had actually, it was looking like a very good weekend for him going through both the practice sessions, Q1 and Q2. But then his weekend kind of had an abrupt turn there with his qualifying mistake going out of turn 4, got on the curbs, lost the rear end, and ended up on the wall. Started the Grand Prix in 10th with his teammate in second. I do think, it was tough to see that for him and for his, championship hopes and for his hopes for the win were pretty much his hopes for the win were pretty much gone at that point. But I know he made that mistake in quali. He didn't finish on the podium, lost the championship lead, and all that. You would think going out of this weekend would be a really tough look for Lando, and one where he would probably lose a lot of confidence. But I will say for Lando to only finish 9 seconds off the lead, starting 10th with his teammate starting second, I actually think it was a really excellent drive from Lando during the Grand Prix. If it weren't for that quality mistake, I think he truly could have gotten on pole and kind of ran away with this race, because we saw he had better pace than Oscar in FP1, FP2, FP3. Q1, Q2, he was ahead. He was the driver to beat there. This weekend, it actually seemed like it had a lot of positives for Norris until that big crash. I think if he gets these Q3 issues figured out, that really seems where we've had the biggest problems for him so far is he's just not laying down a lap in Q3, and that's actually where he was the best last year. So it's kind of odd to see that switch for him. But once he gets that figured out, I think he's in a great spot moving forward, because I think he's starting to really unlock. I think he's had pace in that car all year, but especially this weekend, it looked like he was the better of the two McLaren drivers, except for that one mistake. So, it was a terrible outcome, I would say, finishing P4 in that McLaren. But all things considered, I think you have to go away from this weekend taking away a lot of positives if you're Lando.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly a 10 out of 10 weekend, but it was a very solid job of damage limitation. I think, like we mentioned earlier, all he needs is one good weekend in Miami now, and he could kind of reflip the script between him and Oscar and get them back on a level playing field as far as the Drivers' Championship. But I think for this weekend specifically, I think the only thing, obviously, a quali lap aside, that's different. But during the race, I think the only thing that they kind of wish would have gone a little differently is just catching Leclerc at the end for the last podium spot. I think that they'll be a little bit disappointed that they didn't do that, given the struggles and limitations of the Ferrari right now. They probably felt like they had the pace to get him at the end. I thought that there was a good chance they would get him at the end, and just they didn't have it those last couple laps. But I still think overall it was a really good job of damage limitation from Lando. I certainly don't think top two was ever in the cards, just with the way Max was driving, and Oscar was always going to finish ahead of him at the end of the day here. So overall, nearly as good as you can ask here from Lando, and better than I thought that he would do pre-race. I know how much pace that McLaren has, but I figured Jeddah can be a little bit of a tough place to pass, just given it being a street circuit, and there can be some really tight corners there. You got to really bring your best to pull off some moves in a lot of those corners. And Lando really, I felt like, had a really solid race. Again, not a 10 out of 10 weekend, but a good job given the circumstances in qualifying, and kind of, keeps him in this championship battle. Not that he was ever going to be out just on this one race, but it's definitely a good job of damage limitation.
Yeah, I also love the strategy play that McLaren brought for him, going from the hard to medium instead of the medium to hard like everybody else. Starting back in P10, you really had to do something different to make up those positions, and I think that really actually worked out well, going longer and finishing on the mediums. Just doing something different, giving him some sort of advantage. He had an advantage towards the end of that first stint as the guys with the mediums were falling off, and then he had an advantage at the end with better medium tires than the guys on older hards. So I love that strategy play for McLaren. They're sometimes a little bit too cautious, I would say, on strategy and not trying anything bold. I like that they tried this one here, because I think it gave Lando a much better shot at something. And plus, going long on those hards, you get a good safety car there, a well-timed safety car, and you might not be in the lead, but you're in top 3, top 4, right up next to the guys in the lead with better tires. So I love that they tried something different. I think it gave Lando the best chance at a really good finish, a podium finish, or even a win if the safety car comes out at the right time. So I want to shout out McLaren for that, because I think that we've kind of dogged them a little bit for some strategy calls this year and last year as well, more specifically. But I think that this one was a good one and gave Lando a pretty good shot at getting a decent result as well.
Yeah, and I think, not to switch the subject here, I know he's going to be next up anyways, but I think McLaren and Ferrari really nailed the strategy here. These two guys fighting for the podium. I mean, Leclerc he drove a great race, but you could tell that Ferrari is struggling. I mean, Hamilton had a lot of struggles with it this weekend, just like he has most of the weekend so far. And they just really did a great job. You could tell that they had a lot of pace chasing down Russell there at the end. Leclerc managed those medium tires really well to get through kind of a long stint there at the start, and then they came on hot at the end. I thought that he did a fantastic job, and Ferrari, just given what they have right now for a car, kind of maximized what they could get at least out of Leclerc.
Yeah, I was going to say Leclerc getting his first podium of the year, Ferrari's first podium of the season as well, if you don't count the sprint win for Hamilton, obviously. First Grand Prix podium. That outstanding long stint on the medium tires was, I would say, probably the best stint we've seen from anyone this year, best tire stint. He took those mediums like 6, 7, 8 laps longer than anybody else was able to and still had the pace. So, yeah, I think... I don't know if I would say that was a Ferrari strategy play or if that was just Leclerc, being able to manage those tires so well that he was able to do it.
Yeah.
Either way, though, Ferrari made the right decision leaving him out, not bringing him in sooner. So I give him props for that. But, I think it was an outstanding race from Leclerc from that standpoint of managing tires, and he had the race pace, too. I mean, he only finished 8 seconds off the lead, with his teammate well farther back than that. So, yeah, Leclerc, an incredible race, and he's going to we're not there yet, but he'll be on my personal podium for that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Ferrari, kind of still has a good ways to go with this car. There's, complaints about it all weekend with a lack of grip and just really some struggles, understeer, oversteer, the whole 9 yards. But I think that was really a fantastic drive from Leclerc, another, like you mentioned, guy that we'll recognize later. I think, after the race, he seemed pretty shocked that he could get onto the podium, and they sort of asked him, if he got the most out of the car, and he said he felt like it was basically like he got more than he expected, that didn't think that they could manage a podium. So, yeah, I think that they've still got a long ways to go in their car development. They've clearly got a long ways to go as far as getting Hamilton comfortable to the car and getting him to where he can be, and obviously has been many times before. So they've got a long ways to go as a team, but I think this is a positive step forward, and hopefully it's a little bit of a morale boost to the Ferrari garage just to put a car back on the podium and kind of feel like you're taking a step in the right direction.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask if this is a sign that Ferrari is headed in that right direction. Like we said, the tire wear seemed good, the race pace seemed good. For Leclerc, my answer would be yes and no, because the tire wear was good for Charles, but it seemed like Lewis was still really struggling out there. He was falling off hard at the end of that first medium stint, and then he had to go onto the hards a lot sooner, so he just didn't really have the pace at the end with a much longer hard stint than obviously what Leclerc did. So the car definitely seems improved to me. It seems like it is going in the right direction, but I think they still have work to do to have both of their drivers on or near the podium a lot more consistently and fighting for Grand Prix wins as well. I think that there's still work there. For Charles as well, I mean, I think that there is still some work to be done. This race was as good as he could have done, or even better than what he expected, like you said. But some of these other races this year, I think he's been very good. He just hasn't been great, and a lot of that is due to the car as well. But Lewis has some ways to go still, I think. Other than China, he's kind of been struggling so far this year. I don't doubt he can get there, but there is still some areas of improvement for sure for Lewis and that side of the garage.
Yeah, I think Leclerc has actually been very good, especially these last few races, 2 fourths and a third in his last 3 races. I mean, he's really, I don't know if he's getting comfortable with the car. I don't know if that's the right word, because there's clearly still struggles, but he's at least adjusting to it and
Mm-hmm.
making the most out of it. So I actually think that he's made a lot of progress. But I mean, you look at Hamilton, only one race better than seventh, obviously not including the sprint win in China. It's just kind of been a lot of struggles for him. And I know that this is a new car. It was a new car for Leclerc too, because they made a lot of adjustments in the off season. It kind of redeveloped the whole car. But with Lewis especially coming into this team, and Ferrari just having some standards as far as the way the car drives that are different than other teams, I think it's just been a long learning curve for him, and I'm hoping that he can get it figured out soon, because I'd love to see him up there fighting these guys for podiums. It's just not happening at the moment, and I think both these guys deserve a little better car, and I'm hoping they can get one soon.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not like the Mercedes are bad by any means, but Kimi coming in as a rookie, and Lewis has kind of consistently been finishing behind him so far this year. So there is work to be done there for Hamilton, and that side of Ferrari, like you said, the car, much different than what he's used to at Mercedes, and just, the way that they operate as a team, the way that some of the, even the buttons and controls on the car work are completely different and kind of foreign to him. So it probably will take some time for him to get adjusted. We're kind of seeing a similar thing with Carlos Sainz at Williams. Obviously, a downgrade for performance in that perspective for Carlos to Williams, but just a similar thing of taking time to adjust to a new car, getting used to that. I think that there is something to say there for that side of things, and I would hope that by mid-season, going into the second half here, that Hamilton would kind of start to figure things out and really make a push for some good podium performances and maybe even some wins if the Ferrari can get there. But it is surprising to me too that I feel like Fred Vasseur is kind of really just downplayed the start to the season the whole time and said, there's nothing to panic about. We're getting there. The car's headed in the right direction. I wouldn't say they've been terrible this year, but they haven't been, I think, what a lot of people expected them to be. So maybe they have some tricks up their sleeves and some upgrades that are coming that they're all very confident about. But right now it's getting better, but it's still not great, I would say, at Ferrari.
Yeah, and I've talked about all year so far that I expect Ferrari eventually will get this car kind of figured out and win a couple races, get some podiums, and they'll be kind of a lot closer to where we expected them. But yeah, they're certainly not there yet. I mean, they're behind Red Bull at the moment, and points-wise, Red Bull has effectively been a one-car team so far this year, which, of course, is a credit to Max, like always, but also just a sign of Ferrari's struggles. They're, like you mentioned, they're a good bit behind Mercedes now with a rookie in Antonelli, who, admittedly, in my opinion, at least, has been fantastic this year. It was one of my good surprises of the year so far. He's just been incredibly consistent, really, except for that Bahrain race, and a lot of that wasn't his fault, just unluckiness and with the strategy and whatnot. But as far as behind the wheel, he's been phenomenal this year. But my point is, Ferrari certainly a long way to go here and a disappointing start. But I think that they'll figure it out eventually. It's just a matter of when. I'm hoping. I think once they get back to Europe for the summer, hopefully you'd see some upgrades maybe around Imola, or maybe probably won't bring them for Monaco unless they're circuit specific, but maybe after Monaco, just something soon to get this turned around. I mean, this is the time last year, of course, where McLaren brought their upgrades right around Miami, and that turned around their season.
Yep.
So certainly any of these top four teams could come in next week with, or 2 weeks from now, I guess, in Miami with big upgrades, or they could come to Imola with big upgrades and kind of flip the script on the season. But for right now, they've got a long way to go, but I think they'll figure it out eventually.
Yeah, I agree. I think they'll figure it out eventually. It's just, to me, it's a little bit of a shame because we had so much, preseason, off-season hype for them heading in. And I've said it before, but I picked them for my champions this year, and that's obviously not looking great so far. I think we might have been a little bit fooled by some of the preseason hype, but I would love for them to get there because I love to see both Leclerc and Hamilton performing at their best with the best equipment they can handle. So, yeah, I think it would be great for the championship as well to have both of those guys fighting the McLarens and Max Verstappen and Russell up there as well, more consistently than what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have them as my preseason champions, but they were the team I was most excited to watch preseason coming in, because those guys obviously have the best pedigree as a duo of any driver pairing, and I just was really thrilled to watch those guys hopefully compete for race wins and for a championship. And of course, that just hasn't happened yet. I'm just hoping that they get a little bit this season, can get a couple wins and get some momentum, because next year I think is kind of a mystery. There's a lot of speculation that the Mercedes-powered cars are going to be the dominant cars next year, and if that's the case, it's going to be really tough on Ferrari. Obviously, there's a lot to play out there that could be wrong as time goes on, but we're only going to have so much time with this driver duo of Leclerc and Hamilton, just given Hamilton's age, and I'd like to see them be competitive here for a stretch, whether it's this year or next year at some point before we, lose that duo.
Yeah, I'm right there with you 100%. The lone incident, the only incident from the race was on lap 1. Yuki Tsunoda and Pierre Gasly coming together. I just wanted to get your opinion if this was, to you, if there was any blame to be put on one specific driver here, if it just seemed like a racing incident. To me, it looked like a lap 1 racing incident. Two guys fighting for a position, just running out of room on a tight circuit. I didn't know if you had any other opinions on this, though, or if you're kind of in that boat. I think a lot of people have kind of deemed it just a racing incident.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking it's a racing incident as well. Just lap 1 of the race, obviously you're always going to have a little more leniency there. These guys so close to each other fighting for position. And we know these are two guys that don't have any bad blood or anything. They're great friends off the track, former teammates. So these guys, there's nothing there. I think it's just sort of, if anything, maybe Gasly got a little bit over aggressive there, but I think on lap 1, that's not, he didn't do anything so egregious that it should be penalized or anything. It just was a little bit unfortunate. He kind of went for a move there, and Tsunoda either didn't see him or tried to shut the door, and we end up with both cars out of the race.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think the penalty as well is they're both out of the race, so I don't think there's much to be put on there.
No, you're right.
I will say, and this kind of is a little bit of a discussion I was going to bring up too with the Piastri Max thing in turn 1, is I feel like some of these turns at Jeddah are just very difficult for side-by-side racing. There's just not really a lot of room. I feel like every year, especially into turn 1, we see turn 1, lap 1, we see someone or multiple drivers just go straight across because there's just no room. We see through some of these sweeping S's where there is, extra room to just go straight. We see guys just go straight because there's nowhere for them to go during these, close battles when we have restarts or race starts or whatever. So that's just something I've noticed from Jeddah. I feel like maybe that's an area that could be improved at the track, so we don't have more situations like this where we have to give Max a penalty there. If there's some other situation in that corner, if the corner is shaped a little bit differently, or if there's gravel there or a wall or whatever, that would, kind of naturally deter that situation from happening in the first place. And similar incidents around the track as well. But that's just one thing I feel like I've noticed from Jeddah. I feel like we see every year something like this happen because the track is just so tight and there's not really a lot of places to go.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's important for really any F1 track, because we see all these turn 1 incidents, especially in lap 1 or when they're coming off a standstill start off a safety car. These guys are all going to kind of send it into turn 1 on some level, and you got to be able to offer side-by-side racing, and there's just not a lot of room for that at Jeddah, unfortunately. So yeah, I agree with you, and I think that kind of goes back to this track being a great qualifying track, and then the racing is good, but there's I think some adjustments that could really make it a great track, and it's just there's just not enough room in turn one. I'd say that's one of the big ones.
Yeah, let's just do this. I was going to do this later, but let's just do it now. I was going to ask you if you think Jeddah is a top half or a bottom half track on the F1 calendar, because I think it is one of those tracks, like you said. I feel like something crazy happens here every year. There's always some incident or something. It's always, I feel like, an exciting race. And it's definitely it's right there with Monaco as some of the best qualifying laps you'll see all year. Just the low fuel, high speeds. It's insane to watch. But yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts on where you kind of see this track among the F1 calendar, because we're also getting a new Saudi Arabian track in a few years, where I don't think we'll be going to Jeddah anymore. So before we're not moving on right away, but before we move on from Jeddah, just kind of get your feelings on what you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to kind of ballpark it. I didn't do like a full, complete ranking of every track on the calendar, but just looking down the schedule, I would probably say it's kind of close to average for racing, that there's certainly some tracks that are a lot more inconsistent or are just, consistently poor for racing, like, somewhere like at Monaco. But I would say for qualifying, I think it's one of the best we have on the calendar, and it's one of the most exciting Saturdays of the year, in my opinion, right up there with Monaco and a couple others. I think it's a phenomenal qualifying track, and I think you really get to see the pace of the cars. I mean, I feel like it's about the fastest they go all year is going through those sort of not even high-speed corners. They're just kind of turns that they have at Jeddah. They can just take flat out, and I think it's really enjoyable as a fan to watch on Saturdays. But like you said, Sundays are just a little, they're fine, but they're not up there with especially a lot of the European tracks, and, maybe like a Coda or an Interlagos, some other tracks that we like the racing at. I just don't have Jeddah on that level from a racing standpoint, but I think the excitement on Saturdays makes up for it, in my opinion.
Yeah, to me, it's definitely, I would say, a top 5 qualifying track for sure.
Yeah.
Like you said, I think it's middle of the road for me as a race circuit. Like I said, I think something fun happens here every year, something exciting. And we do get some good battles. I just think there's not as many as we could have because it is so tight, which, makes the qualifying so exciting. So there's kind of some give and take there. And you have more passing opportunities than somewhere like Monaco. So, that's always a positive as well. So yeah, I would kind of say it's just middle of the line. Honestly, I might rank it higher if some of these circuits weren't, so filled with history and so historic and iconic to the sport that we have on the F1 calendar. I might rank it a little higher, but some of this also has to do with how these cars race on it right now, and that's kind of a car thing as well, not necessarily a circuit thing. Like, I think we would all agree that Suzuka is a better circuit than Jeddah, but Suzuka, I would say, produced a much worse race this year. So it's kind of a give and take there as well. But that's why I kind of like it just middle of the pack as well. I would probably have to put it slightly bottom half, but just barely, just because I feel like there are a lot of really good circuits and circuits with a lot of history, and I kind of have to take that into consideration despite the racing that we may see with this version of car.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be fun one day to do a ranking or a tier list of all the tracks, because there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them that I think, especially some of the street courses, that can really be hit or miss for me, that are either fantastic or, really poor. Like somewhere like Baku for me is like can either be one of the best or worst races of the year, and there's not really an in between. So it's kind of crazy Suzuka being like that this year, because normally that's one of my favorite circuits, but just really didn't deliver, unfortunately. So that's why I found it kind of tough to do a ranking of any sort, was just because some tracks it's so dependent on the package of the car and just sort of how the race plays out. And yeah, it's just very, very dependent year to year, a lot of these tracks.
Yeah, I think we may have to do a full ranking of all the circuits because I agree. I'd like to see, my kind of how mine plays out as well. I think I have a clue, but I'm not really sure until I go in and, rank them all. So that may be something we have to do in the near future as well.
Yeah.
Another storyline that I've been following all year. I've thought about bringing it up earlier, but I'd like to see, kind of how it played out. But now I think it's time. With how many races we are into the season, that Fernando Alonso has yet to score a point this year. He finished 11th this week, just on the edge of the points. Unfortunately, wasn't able to get there. It's just kind of shocking to me that he has not scored a point so far. I know that the Aston Martin isn't a fantastic car by any means, but we all know how good he is, and you'd think he would have willed that car to a point at some point this season. So to me, I'm shocked that he hasn't scored a point yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's more shocking, of course, is that Lance Stroll has 10 points and that Alonso has none, because I think the last few races, it's a little bit tough to put that much on Alonso because the car has just been really pretty slow.
Yeah.
These last few races especially. I mean, I think I saw in Bahrain that some of the calculations had them last in race pace, even behind Sauber. Even if they're ahead of them in 8th or 9th, that's still a major step back for Aston Martin. So I find it hard to put too much on Fernando here. I mean, this weekend he comes in 11th, just misses out on the points, and that's a pretty solid performance, all things considered. So I don't think it's a case of panic for Alonso or anything. I do think, looking back on it now, those first couple races for Lance Stroll were more impressive than I think at least I gave him credit for at the start. Bagging a couple points finishes at the start of the year, but it's really a struggle right now for Aston Martin, and it kind of looks like they might end up just punting on this year, like I thought they might, and just throwing it all on 2026.
Yeah, to me, the Aston Martins and the Stake Saubers have been, the two most irrelevant teams, I would say, so far this year. You have the Williams kind of, punching above their weight, having a good season so far. All of the drama with Racing Bulls, the driver swap there. Hadjar has done pretty well. Lawson we've kind of followed that drama. And then you have Haas has been performing well above expectations as well. So yeah, those three teams have kind of punched above their weight. I feel like Alpine as well. Gasly could have scored points here this weekend without that incident. I think he would have, and he had a good finish last week as well in 7th. So I think it's just of the bottom midfield teams, the Aston Martins have. You're right. They just haven't looked like they've really had pace anywhere, to be honest. Haven't really talked about them or really even thought about them much so far this year, and that is a shame coming from where they were a couple years ago, falling off to where they are now. But you can only hope, if you're an Aston Martin fan, that they are kind of just punting on this year and going all in on 2026 with Newey and everything. It's kind of weird because they're performing pretty poorly this season, but I feel like they're in a very bright spot for the future of that team and what they can accomplish going forward. A lot of facilities upgrades, obviously bringing Newey in, new regulations kind of opens it up. I think there's a lot to be excited for. Honda coming in, I mean, there's a lot really to look forward to, but right now it looks pretty bleak.
Yeah, I think, if I was an Aston Martin fan, I guess I am wearing the jersey today, but if I was like a diehard Aston Martin fan, I would not be worried at all. It's just kind of one of those years where you're looking towards the future, and that's all it is. I mean, there's rumors, of course, of them offering a big contract to Verstappen and, potentially even a Saudi takeover, as a part of that. There's a lot going on with that team right now that, even whether it's Lawrence Stroll or the Saudis or whoever at the helm in the future, there's a lot of bright spots going forward with Newey and, with still having Alonso on the team, we'll see what happens with Stroll here long term with Lance. Of course not Lawrence, but yeah, for me, there's a lot of bright spots still for Aston Martin. This is not a panic. For me, it's just a down year, and that's kind of what I expected.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think there's a lot to be excited for, and that kind of outweighs just having one poor season here right before a regulation change.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get to our personal podiums for the week. I have Oscar Piastri number 1. Just going out, taking control of the championship. I thought it was the exact weekend that he needed, and probably the best weekend he could have had, considering he looked behind his teammate for the majority of it until Q3 in the race. Charles Leclerc, I have in second, first podium of the season for him. I thought that stint on the mediums, we've talked about it, but I think it was as good of a stint I've seen in a long time, and probably the best we've seen so far this season for any driver. And then in third, I have Carlos Sainz, finished P8, his first real points in a Williams, crossing the line in the points. Obviously got upgraded a few races back after some DQs ahead of him. But yeah, he helped his teammate as well, Albon, hold off Hadjar, giving him DRS to defend for 20, 30 laps there at the end. I just think it was an excellent performance from Sainz, and one that I kind of expected to see more of heading into this year, and I think we will start to see that now as he's seemed to get more comfortable with the car. He had a great finish, or he had a great race last week as well until he had that issue where he got that big hole in the side pod and had to retire the car. So I think things are turning up for Carlos, but it was good to see him get in some real points here.
Yeah, I was happy to see that as well. He's a guy that we've talked about a lot in his struggles so far this year, but he's a guy that I like a lot. So I was thrilled to see him do well, and Williams double points again here. It's great stuff. For me, I went pretty simple this week with my podium. I went with Piastri first as well, and then I went with Verstappen second. And honestly, I had a debate, whether or not Verstappen's weekend, whether he deserved the first spot here, just because that qualifying lap again, that's 2 qualifying laps now this year between Saudi and Japan that were just, masterclass laps from Verstappen, some of the best that we've ever seen from him. And of course, that's a high bar to clear. And then he comes out in the race and, obviously is unable to, convert the pole position into a win, but still drove a phenomenal race. It kept it right there, applied pressure to Piastri the whole time. And, if turn 1 plays out a little differently, like we said, maybe he wins. So, but I do have Piastri first, just like you mentioned, did everything he could on the weekend. Still a really good qualifying lap from him as well, and then takes charge in turn 1 and, ends up winning the race. And then I have Leclerc third, even though that's our actual 1, 2, 3 podium, just because I felt like he drove a phenomenal race in that Ferrari. Just we mentioned all the struggles they had, all the steering issues and grip and what else. And Leclerc was just, fantastic to hold on to that podium spot there at the end against Norris, and, get by Russell and Mercedes as well. I thought he drove a great race. Since I went basic 1, 2, 3 here with the podium, I'll give a shout out as well to Isaac Hadjar as sort of an honorable mention here. We just mentioned him a second ago and what he's done this year, but points for the second time already. And I kind of did this quick, and hopefully I didn't misread something, but I believe he's 4-0 against his teammates since that Australia incident at the start of the year. So just really impressive stuff for a rookie. And we talked already about how impressive the rookie class as a whole has been, and he really, I think, was fantastic this week. Very well could have ended up higher. I thought maybe, right behind those Williams at the end, maybe he could have pushed up to P9 or P8, but still putting it in the points. Another solid weekend for him, and kind of just a shout out for what he's done so far this season.
Yeah, I could totally have seen Hadjar on my personal podium as well. I feel like everyone kind of had pretty good weekends this weekend. That's why it was really hard for me to make this podium, and it was hard to kind of find a stinker of the week as well. But yeah, Max easily could have been on here. I even could have put Lando on here for that recovery drive as well. Yeah, a lot of guys that I thought about. But, I think this is a good step for Sainz. That's why I had him on here, and Leclerc as well. I think it was good steps for both of those guys. But, yeah, Hadjar, I think, has been maybe – I think Antonelli's still been the best rookie, and Behrman's right there, but Hadjar's up with those two as the best rookies we've seen so far. My stinker of the week is Jack Doohan. It was a tough one to pick stinker of the week, like I said, because I don't think anyone was terrible, but Doohan finished P17 with two guys out of the race that probably would have finished ahead of him, so kind of effectively P19. And, one where his teammate, one of those guys that was out of the race, would have probably finished in the points. I think he would have, at least, had it not been for that incident. So, yeah, I think it wasn't Doohan's best weekend. I think he's coming off a few solid races from him where things were looking up. I think Doohan, it's going to come to him, but this weekend, in the Grand Prix at least, he didn't really have the pace. Maybe they went on a different strategy play that I didn't see either. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, P17 finish with two guys out that, likely would have finished ahead of you is tough, only finishing ahead of Bortoleto, a rookie in the worst car on the grid. So yeah, it was a tough weekend, I think, for Doohan.
Yeah, I went ahead and I thought about this a little bit, had a couple guys in mind, but I went ahead and went with Doohan as well, just because of his struggles, coming in 17th in qualifying, obviously with Gasly all the way up at 9th, was not a great start. And like you mentioned, not his best race either. And part of this is just due to, the pressure that he's under at the moment to perform. I feel like there hasn't been quite as much of a barrage as there was at the start of the season of calls for replacement, but that certainly could amp up if Gasly continues to, be well clear of him. Maybe they want to give Colapinto a shot. We'll see. But the only other guy I really considered here was Gabriel Bortoleto. Even though usually I give him a little bit of a pass, and Hulkenberg as well, just being in that Sauber. Yeah. But it wasn't the cleanest race for Bortoleto. That Alonso incident was pretty tough, braking or kind of swerving there under braking and almost running Alonso into the wall was not ideal. So yeah, it wasn't really his best race either. But I think just given that the Alpine's a faster car and the fact that Doohan is under a little more pressure to succeed at the moment, I think he's just a little bit ahead here for stinker of the week.
Yeah, I think the only other one I could have considered would even be Lewis Hamilton, just finishing that far behind Leclerc. Yeah. I wasn't expecting him to be fourth or right behind Leclerc. A fifth even would have been fine or whatever. But to be that many seconds behind, I think, is the more concerning part. And really just not being able to get anywhere close to what Leclerc got out of those tires. He didn't even have to do the stint Leclerc did, but I felt like his tires fell off very, very quickly, and Leclerc's, what he was able to do was incredible. So that'd be the only other one I would consider. But I still think Doohan probably would be the one that I would put up there.
Yeah, I think Hamilton got a little bit of a pass in my mind because, he started 7th and finished 7th, and that's kind of, feels a little bit uneventful. But you're right. He was about 0.6 a lap slower than Leclerc throughout the race. And we already talked a little bit about Hamilton earlier, but there's certainly a long way to go there. And I will say for Lewis, since these new regs, Jeddah has been one of his worst circuits. He's had a lot of struggles there, and part of that I think was maybe due to the Mercedes that they had there for a couple years that really had some struggles with straight line speed and all the bouncing and whatnot. But so maybe just Jeddah, not Lewis Hamilton's circuit in this version of the car. But yeah, not a great weekend for him either.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about him not performing this generation of car here. Maybe just not his best circuit. So hopefully we'll see some things turn around for him in Miami. Coming up. Let's get to our predictions for next week. We only have NASCAR at Talladega next week. One of the hardest ones to predict of any race that we cover. Talladega and Daytona probably being the two. I'll give my winner pick to Ryan Blaney, though. I know you can kind of throw the stats out the window here on super speedways, but Blaney does have an average finish of 12.5 since 2022 here, and one win in that time period as well. Also, just commonly kind of known, him and Penske as some of the best road or super speedway course drivers in NASCAR. So I think that helps him as well. And on top of that, I think Blaney's just kind of due for a win, to be honest, after all the bad luck he's had this year. Maybe the 1 week break for NASCAR, just resetting for Blaney, will help him and that team. And maybe he'll finally get a break to go his way at a track where it's kind of, luck of the draw, to be honest. Maybe he'll finally get lucky this year and get out with a win. So that's my pick. I think Blaney gets it done this week in Talladega, but it could honestly be anyone.
Yeah, funny enough, my pick was Ryan Blaney as well.
Oh, there you go.
I think that you talked about him being due, and I think that's something that we've said already a few times. I feel like he's been kind of a common pick for me this year. And Talladega, like you mentioned, is just it could be anybody's ball game here. But I will say Blaney, in this next gen does have a win and has led to over double the laps of anyone else at Talladega in the next gen era. So I think if you're gonna pick anyone, William Byron and Chase Elliott have a better average finish, but I think Blaney might be in the best position to win here, and that's why I've gone with him. And like you mentioned, maybe this week off is a big deal for them and will be a big help. And they're gonna get one eventually. And I feel like this could be, even as difficult of a track as this is to predict, it could be as good of a week as any to see him get back in victory lane.
Yeah, I love the Blaney play here, just for that fact that I think he's kind of due, and maybe the fortunes will reverse for him on a track like Talladega. My one bold prediction here is that the race will not end under caution. I think pretty much all these super speedways now, we see the race either ends under caution, they don't get back to the start-finish line, or it's a overtime finish. I think, it may be an overtime finish, but I don't think the race will end under caution. I think that they'll make it back to the checkered flag. That extended kind of straightaway towards the end, not finishing in the tri-oval, I think might help a little bit. With that, I feel like we've seen some races here where they're wrecking across the line, but it doesn't end under yellow. So I'm hoping maybe that's the case, and we can get one of these super speedway races to, finally kind of have a smooth, clean, natural finish.
Yeah, so I like that bold prediction, and I'm hoping that one comes true. My bold prediction is another really good week here for Legacy Motor Club. Obviously, had a great week in Daytona at the start of the year with Eric Jones and Jimmy Johnson. I think, this is not John Hunter Nemechek's best track. He's one of the worst average finishers here, actually. Granted, he's only had a couple races in this car at Talladega in the Cup Series, so maybe that'll turn around a little bit here, but I'm kind of leaning more towards Eric Jones here as being an underdog pick. Obviously, I didn't pick him to win the race, but I think he could be right there at the end. Another guy who's led some laps here, but also, 4 top 10s in 6 next-gen races here. So, yeah, I think that he's going to be a guy to watch, and a guy that it could end up in victory lane, or at least I think we'll be there at the end, putting up a fight and getting some more good points for Legacy Motor Club.
Yeah, I like that. I think that they definitely have the opportunity here to get some good points. And like you said, we had Atlanta as well, but the other 2.5 mile super speedway we've had this year, Legacy did pretty well. So I think that's a good play. And those guys I feel like have been outperforming so far this year as a whole as well. Kind of what I expected. So yeah, I think Eric Jones or even John Hunter Nemechek could get a good finish here.
Yep.
Well, that's everything for this week. We'll be back next week to break down NASCAR at Talladega, any other news that comes up from any series. And yeah, I think it was a good weekend in Saudi Arabia. I enjoyed the race. I enjoyed the qualifying. And hopefully we have some more good weekends to come here soon.
Yeah, going from Saudi Arabia to Talladega is quite the turnaround,
Yeah.
but Talladega is always one of my favorite races in any series, so I'm excited to talk about it next week.
Yep, me too. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Yep, see you soon.